Eric DeGatti here from One Human Performance, and today we're going to talk about the cable chop exercise. This is an awesome rotational drill for all your rotational athletes, which is pretty much everyone, and works with us going across our body in the transverse plane. Now, in the matter of semantics, we talk in the FMS about the chop and lift, referring to the chop being from high to low and the lift being from low to high. For our purposes today, this is just working across the body and everything's going to be considered a chop. Now, this can be done in multiple positions. You can do it in a half kneeling stance, and a split stance, and an open stance, and a single leg stance. But for our purposes today, we're going to work out of a standing open stance. So let's start with setup. What I like to use is a long cable strap handle, and that way it won't dig into your arm and gives you a little bit more play. We're going to always reach across our body and stack the inside hand, so when we come across, we're driving with that inside top hand. That is going to mimic what we use in a baseball bat or a golf swing, where we're stacked with our hands like so. From there, we want to get into a good athletic position. That means the knees are unlocked, the hips are back, and I'm centered over the arches of my feet. When I grab the cable, I want to step out so the weight is off of the stack. From here, I'm going to learn to transmit force from my inside foot. So I'm going to learn to think of taking that floor and driving it towards the machine so I can use my ground force to get this thing going, and then transmit from the foot through the hip and then finally out through the hand. This is not something you want to be using your hands for, because then you're muscling it from your arms. It should come up and through this chain. Now, before we work on the movement itself, let's talk about a simple principle in terms of how I look at rotation. Rotation, we can break down in where we have the body in three levels. If we have from the top of your head down to your shoulders, shoulders to your waist, and waist to the floor, we have these three counter-rotating layers. It's very much like the toy, the Rubik's Cube, where these layers need to counter-rotate. I need to be able to turn my shoulders under my head, turn my head over my shoulders. I need to be able to turn my shoulders over my hips, turn my hips under my shoulders. If I can't distinguish those three, I'm going to end up being the player who either pulls his head off of the ball, or who bails out early, or can't generate enough force through the hips because I can't get that coiling and that counter rotation. So we're going to keep that in mind, and that adds to lots of variations that we can do within this, where I either want to keep my head straight on. Do I want to rotate my head with it? Do I want my shoulders rotating over my hips rotating under my shoulders? These are all different cues that you can give to create variations depending on what your goal is. Okay, so now we have the cable in our hand. Arms are going to be locked straight, because this should just be an extension of what's happening within here and all the way down to the floor. Once I'm set, as I said, I'm going to drive my inside foot into the ground. I'm going to drive the floor away, and I'm going to come across until it is completely across my body, and the cue I gave is that it lays in line with your arm. If I go any further, the resistance isn't fighting that. It's digging into my body, so I'm going to stop where I'm straight off. Okay, so that's why it's key that I'm perpendicular to the machine itself when I set it up. When I go back, I need to be able to turn my chest away so I can load up through here. If I don't do that, then I'm going to close off, and I can't create any force if I'm here, because the only thing I have left is my arms. Another thing to consider here is what's happening at your hips. When my hip rotates in, that is a closed hip, where now you can see this is an open hip. So when I load and come across, one is going to close and one is going to open. It's going to be a transition from here to where this goes to here. The key to watch for is the knee. If this knee doesn't move, I almost could not use my hip. It's impossible, because the thigh could not rotate inside the hip and have the knee stay there. So I need to see that one hip close off and this open. So if I was going from right to left, I would need this closed to load up this hip and then fire that, and this would then in turn close to open this. Another consideration is that most of us have a dominant rotational side, meaning that if I'm a right-handed hitter or golfer, I'm going to be more natural going from my right to my left than I am from my left to my right. What I generally will tend to do is start on the more unnatural side. That way we can start to train that pattern. It'll actually have some carryover to the actual sport-specific pattern. Plus, if there's any deficits, I can start to decrease that, because if this person is taking thousands of swings in one direction, we want to try to minimize the imbalances from right to left. Not that we're going to undo it if they're doing thousands of swings, but we want to try to minimize the damage. Another thing to consider here is where I stay over my long axis, meaning I don't want to lean and I don't want to lunge when I come across. The cue I'll often give is if this cable should ever snap, you should stay balanced over your hips. So if I'm here, I will swivel and stay long through here. I don't want to lunge and I don't want to overreach and lose that long axis, because that's where I create my power from my hips. Another thing to watch for is to see the timing and sequencing of this. If the hands go first, chances are I'm muscling it from my shoulders. If I go here and my hips are already gone, I have nothing left except to use my arms and my shoulders. It should generate from the floor, push, and then it follows through where you could see that came from the foot to the hip to the hand. If this is here, I have nothing left to go with other than my hand. If this goes here, then obviously I didn't use my hips at all. You need to see that fluid sequence where it drives, comes across, and then controls down. The cable chop is an awesome drill that I put as a staple in almost everybody's program in some variation. Now, with that, I can come up with multiple different versions of this. We can go and set the cable high and go from high to low. We can set it low and go from low to high. We can work all these different variations and they all transfer really, really well for all your rotational athletes. Enjoy.